I honestly think, everybody's faith is being tested at this time, and 1 Peter 1 talks about that our faith will be tested, so it's actually proved genuine, so that it will grow. People finding how they connect to God. Me being an extrovert, I find it more challenging. Learn more about myself in this moment in time. But I think I honestly believe as you move through these things that we should end up stronger rather than weaker. And the key is it's actually stronger in faith. And one of the things it talks about, actually, faith comes by hearing God. It's not just reading the Bible, but by hearing. And so I've been thinking about that over the last number of weeks, and I've heard a lot of people saying, "Well, what's God saying at the moment?" And not last week I was just in some conversations, and I was just noticing something, and I thought, I think there's also another question to ask, which you might be surprised by. But my question really is, well, what's the devil saying at the moment? And because he's not silent, so I think we say, well, what's God saying? Good. We're all desperately keen to have that. But there's a lovely passage, in James. It talks about if you draw close to God, He will draw close to you, and we love that. But actually, in the same verse, it says, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." And there's a duality of those two things. That actually, it's not just draw close to God, and the devil will take no notice of you at that point in time. He will try and deflect you, distract you, all sorts of stuff to stop you drawing close to God. So he will be a voice in your head, and if we resist him, he will flee. But if we don't recognize that it's his voice and we welcome it as a different voice, not necessarily God's voice, but an understandable voice. If we recognize it as if we misrecognize it, but I'll put it that way. If we think that's a helpful, that's understandable, all sorts of things, then we might start to embrace a voice that we don't really want to. So I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've just jotted some things down. There's a verse, it's in 2 Corinthians 2 verse 11, and it says this, that we do these things. It says it's mainly about forgiveness there, but it says in order that Satan might not outwit us. Now that's really helpful, because he actually wants to outwit you, and he's quite smart. He's been at this game for a long time. And then it goes on to say, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Now, I chuckle to myself when I read that. So I thought, I wish that was true. I wish that was true, because I think we aren't as aware of his schemes as we could and should be. That might be because we primarily live in a secular society, so we actually have a rational thought process, and we can rationalize things out. Whereas that was written into a much more spiritual understanding, where people were far more aware of the spirit world. And so in Africa, for instance, if you go to Africa, people are quite aware that there are evil spirits trying to attack them, talk to them, witch doctors. That they're far more aware of that battle that's going on than we are, broadly speaking, in our everyday lives. So I think we're very good, right? Want to hear God. But my question is can we discern when the devil's actually speaking to us and when he's getting through our defenses? And one of the ways I was looking at this is, again, if you think of the story of Nehemiah, basically, the walls of Jerusalem were broken down, and they needed to be rebuilt. And now the point of having a wall is to keep stuff out. And during that rebuilding moment, when their wall was vulnerable, then they had to protect the walls, and everybody was responsible for their own part of the wall. But if there was a particular difficulty, Nehemiah would blow the trumpet, and everybody would run to the one space to make sure the wall was defended. And the picture I have around that is it's actually much better to keep your enemies out than try and evict them once they're in. I'm thinking, I guess most of us have seen the film The Lord of the Rings, when they're defending places like Helm's Deep and Gondor, then the whole thing is keep them outside the walls. Once the walls are breached, you've got a whole lot more trouble than when the enemy's outside. And for me, it's not wrong that you hear the voice of the devil. Okay, so I know that sounds a strange thing, because he will be talking to you. But if you don't understand it's him, and you let those thoughts in, then you've got a whole new battle on your hand of getting them out again, because you've accommodated them as if they're friends, as if they're coming from light. He masquerades as an angel of light. So he doesn't dress it up in a menacing tone. He dresses it up in a helpful tone. And so, thinking in the Garden of Eden, he came alongside Eve and didn't threaten her. He just said, "Oh, by the way, are you sure? What's going on?" And he got past Eve's and Adam's defences in a subtle way, trying to look like he was being helpful, like he was promoting them. And you see the same all through the scriptures. He doesn't. He can be obviously evil, but more often he'll get through your defences, because you'll probably recognise that he's more likely to get through your defences when it sounds like he's being friendly, and it's understandable. And so at the moment, I believe that he's actually very, very active. What I'm discerning around is that he's got a good reason to be active, and he's actually got some pretty fertile soil to sow into at the moment, because of the circumstances that we're in. And so I'm going to go through 4 things briefly. I'll just make sure I don't lose track of time, because I can talk about this a lot, but I just want to give you sort of summary of things to think about. So usually when I teach this, and some of you will have heard me talk about this before, I use the book of Ezra. And a number of years ago, I was sitting in my sitting room in the house we lived in previously, having a cup of coffee with God, and it was probably a Saturday morning. That's when I used to find the most time just to sit down and read a chunk of the Bible. And I find it helpful is actually read a whole narrative, so I get the whole picture. I like studying detail, but sometimes I just like to get the sweep of a story. And I was reading Ezra, and I was familiar with it, but finding the new stuff there. And I was so excited as I was reading the book of Ezra, because it starts out with Cyrus, king of Persia, makes the decree to his whole empire. Now, he was probably the most powerful man, certainly in the Mediterranean at that stage. You could argue in the world, but we don't know exactly what was going on in other places like South America. But certainly the known world that we knew of, the biblical world, this was the guy who was in charge, Cyrus, king of Persia. And God spoke to him. And isn't that beautiful? The sovereign God spoke to this guy and said, right, now it's time to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And so Cyrus made this decree, and he basically said to all those whose hearts are moved, any Israelites who really want to do this, go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And not only can you go, but I'm going to resource you. And so he actually put a decree out across the whole empire that all these Israelites were to get all that they needed to rebuild the temple. And that is amazing, isn't it? It reminds me of, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, that again, they were resourced from Egypt to build the tabernacle. So, God isn't short of resources. He can get hold of them from wherever he chooses by speaking to, the relevant powers that be. So they go back and they start to rebuild the temple. Now, I have a very victorious theology. I believe we win. I believe that the church is going to become magnificent, and Jesus will come back for a fantastic bride. So, I believe we're going to win. That he who is in me is greater than he who's in the world. Therefore, I should expect to continue to advance. The kingdom is advancing. All those ideas. So I'm reading this story through. I thought, this is amazing. It's a beautiful story. The Jews are coming out of their captivity, not just into freedom, but building something significant for God. And it carries on, chapter 2, chapter 3, and they're starting to build the temple. Chapter 4, unsurprisingly, opposition comes. Now, what I want to tell you that be slightly encouraged when you're being opposed, because the devil won't bother you with you if you're insignificant. He hasn't got limitless resources. No more demons are being made. You've got limited resources, and so he'll deploy them in a way that is actually going to be effective. So if you're being opposed, it's probably because you've got some significance going on. So that's encouraging in and of itself. So they're doing a significant work. They get opposed, and the enemies actually try and sneak up on them at first. He says, "Oh, wow, we'll help. We'll join in. Just let us join in." So that voice comes in friendly. I want to help you. I want to be your friend right here. And they recognise this one. So no, you're not really our friend. so we're not partnering with you, right? We've heard this before. We're not going to give in to that sort of flattery. We recognise who you are. Now that was a good victory right there. But some people don't even win that first battle, but they did. But then the enemy started to use some other tactics, and this is where you need to be aware of. These are the 4 that I really want you to be aware of. It says in chapter 4 that they started to make them afraid, to discourage them, to frustrate them, and then accuse them. And there's these 4 things that go on. They use 4 tactics. So they discourage them. They seek to discourage them, make them afraid, fearful, to frustrate their plans, and also start to accuse them of stuff. And then as you read through that, you think, well, those are straightforward, But at the end of chapter 4, and this is what I remember so clearly, when I was sitting having my cup of coffee with God, I was reading through this. I thought, yeah, well done, won the first battle. Surely they'll see this one off. At the end of chapter 4, it says the work of God came to a standstill. And I was shocked. And as I was reading it, I literally out of my mouth came, no, because I couldn't believe that a sovereign work of God would come to a standstill. That just didn't fit with my theological understanding. And it made me think, you know what? These enemy tactics are powerful. And how many times have moves of God, sovereign moves of God, come to a standstill because the enemy's actually succeeded and outwitted the saints? And it's true at the moment. He's going to try and outwit us. I believe we have a fantastic opportunity, but I don't believe the opportunity is an inevitability. I believe you always have to work out how you take hold of the opportunity. And so some people say, oh, this is an amazing opportunity. It probably is. But if you don't take it wisely, it could pass you by. And worse than that, you could actually miss it altogether. So as I was looking at these things, I think, that is tragic. And then if you get to chapter 5, it basically says, and when the prophets started to get moving again, then the work started. But I did the research on this, and again, you might have heard me say this before, but the history books would tell you that the work of God came to a standstill for 14 to 15 years. Now that is a long time. That it wasn't just a few weeks. It was 14, 15 years. And I thought, that is a long time. And that, all that time they were effectively kept from their destiny by the captivity of these 4 enemies, as I would call them. And what the Bible says is that we need to defeat strongholds by taking every thought captive. And I would suggest to you at the moment that the world is saying it's you should be afraid. It's right to be afraid. Be cautious, be careful, be this and that. Now, I understand, particularly medical, understand the context. We need to be wise, but the message has been be fearful. And in one sense, as we said, the government was so successful at it, they're now having trouble persuading people not to be fearful. But that's also almost become, oh, right, okay, accepted in there. I would say frustration is a really common malady at the moment. So it's, I don't know if you experienced it. I have. I am frustrated. This is frustrating. And what I say is that these thoughts, they come and knock on your door. So it's that knock, knock, knock. So it's not wrong when those thoughts, you hear that voice, but if you let it in to your thinking, getting it out again is far more challenging than having closed the door on it in the first place. So if you get, a thought like that, don't do yourself down because you're immediately discouraging yourself. Just think, I know where that's coming from. And no, I recognize you and you're not coming in. Because if you do that, if you resist the devil, he will flee from you. But once you let him in, And I think there's a lot of accommodation of this thinking going on at the moment. It's understandable. You know, we understand you're feeling like that. We understand that this is challenging. We understand that, you know, it's uncertain. We understand and there is a lot of understanding. Now, I'm understanding, but understanding something doesn't mean to say it's good for you. Yeah, so well, it's understandable. Yeah, you know, I understand if I run out in front of a bus, it might knock me over and kill me. That understanding does. I still have to act on my understanding. Oh, well, I won't do that. Do you understand? It's. I think a lot of stuff is being explained on the basis of, in these circumstances, you need. This is normal. This is normal, and I think the voice of the devil's going, just be kind. This is normal. It's understandable that you feel like this. It's understandable. It's understandable. And I think that sort of thing is getting through defenses. And I see people starting to embrace. This is within Eastgate I'm talking about. You know, that's my frame of reference. So I've seen this happening within Eastgate, even within our leaders. I was talking about it with them yesterday. I said, we've got to be careful at this moment in time that we're getting our wisdom from the right place, because the Bible says you can get your wisdom from heaven or you can get it from men. And but the human source, it says, is actually ultimately demonic. It comes from the devil. That's it. That's in James chapter 3. And I was talking to the Eastgate leaders yesterday. I said our prime responsibility is spiritual leadership. It's leading ourselves spiritually, not just organising ourselves through chaos. There's a lot of stuff going on. You know, we're looking at how we open up our Sundays again at Eastgate, and there's a lot of regulations. You know, we're working out we're going to be wise, but I'm saying we mustn't do it fearfully. We've got to help those who. There will be people who won't get to our Sunday meetings because they're shielding. There'll be some really good reasons. You know, we're working out very difficult to accommodate children in the building at the moment. How do you do that? And one of the challenges is, will we have the haves and have-nots, those who get to a Sunday meeting and those who don't? Do you see what I mean? Will there be a first-class experience of Eastgate and a second-class experience of Eastgate? You know, we're going to continue with our online stuff as we do this. So I just see the potential for, you know, frustration, discouragement, even accusation. This is one of the other ones. Thinking is that I don't know how much you've been out and about, but people definitely have a differing, varying view of what social distancing means. I don't know if you go somewhere and everybody's careful, avoiding you, and then I've been other places where we went to a garden centre, Kim and I. We were just buying something, and most people keep your distance. But one of the salesmen was right up, and I in one sense, I didn't mind it. I didn't notice it, but I thought, actually, you're probably you're certainly close, as we're talking, trying to sell us something. I thought, now I'm not worried about it, but I know other people who would be. Do you understand? It's the sense of, I wasn't offended by it, but I thought somebody else would say, hey, yeah, you get back. And we're just thinking about this when we're within Eastgate, people will have varying degrees of strictness of how they interpret those things. And so I think we got to work out how we overcome those things. And the four of them have very, very simple antidotes, really. So discouragement, you overcome with encouragement. So actually be really good at encouraging yourself, be good at encouraging other people. Let that be the first thing that comes to your mind. And it's okay to say, oh, that felt discouraging, as long as you don't enter into discouragement. You know, the reality but what gets rid of all fear? Perfect love casts out all fear. Having a loving attitude towards one another is really important at this moment in time. Now, if you want to know what that looks like in practice, then read 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, kind, gentle. It doesn't find fault easily. You know, all those sorts of things. So in our interactions with one another, that needs to come to the fore, because that will start to dispel the fear. So that's that. Accusation, I think we overcome accusation primarily by righteousness, understanding that you are righteous and also that you are glorious. And if you look around at your fellow believers, if you regard them with that light, that they are glorious sons and daughters of the living God, and it's not up to us to judge other people. It really isn't. And that's going to be particularly important at this time. Say, oh, why aren't you coming to Eastgate? Are you afraid? You shouldn't be afraid. And this was interesting. I was talking to a doctor in America last week, and basically in her medical practice, and I won't go into great detail, otherwise it'd be a bit revealing, but they're following normal guidelines, face masks, people coming into their environment, they're asking them to wear face masks. And who do you think they're getting the accusations from? They're getting it from the Christians who are saying, you're telling us we've got to be afraid. How dare you tell me to wear a face mask when I come and see you? And they're getting it in the neck from the Christians. And I thought, goodness me. And basically this accusation from one another. So, and I want to tell you, it's not fearful to wear a face mask. Okay. It might be fearful, but I'm not there to judge what's going on in your mind as to why you're wearing it. Does that make sense to you? And so we can't see into people's minds as to the why they're doing something. At the start of lockdown, Kim and I isolated ourselves very significantly because we were looking after Kim's mum, who's elderly, and Kim was the only contact. There are other people within Eastgate who are shielding themselves for the sake of their relatives who are ill. And so if I say, they look like they're afraid, no. If you think the best of people, and if you really need to have a conversation, ask them why rather than judge them. That makes sense. And then frustration. Our frustration's a slightly more complicated one. It's not got just a one size fits all solution, but I think it comes down to patience. Number one, be patient with yourself. So I was having a good conversation with somebody else in Eastgate, and actually this person was so frustrated with themselves. It was really, and that frustration was actually becoming manifest to other people who thought that, what would be funny, that this person was frustrated with those other people. Then she said, actually, I'm not frustrated with you. I'm just so frustrated with me because of my limitations at this moment in time. And I thought, oh, right, okay. So you have to learn to be kind with yourself. Yeah, patient with yourself. And as you do that, then that will help. But actually, patience towards other people. I think, well, this is a big one I've discerned over the years, is that most people will be working out how they want to do something at the moment. This is how I feel comfortable, and actually, but other people will feel different about it. Now, what I want to tell you is that not everything's going to be done the way you want it to get done. It's not, that's happening in Eastgate. Well, actually, I'm not sure I'd do it like that, but it's, there are going to be decisions that are made together. And, I don't know about you, but I look at some of the government's decisions and say, I'm not quite sure why they made that decision. I'm not sure I would have done it that way as if I'm the fount of all knowledge. You understand? It's very easy to be frustrated and judgmental of the government at the moment, but it's as if they're not thinking about it thoroughly. I'm sure they are, and they have reasons. And somebody said to me the other day, basically, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, because actually everybody's going to criticize and be frustrated. So don't be frustrated with them. Pray for them. Look after it. So and then that element of self-control. So patience. Don't judge other people just by your opinion or your preference, and then your own self-control. So those are things. So, and I think that those are the main things I wanted to get to. It's just that I see that this is one of those moments in time when the devil will actually be very capable of coming alongside you as if he's a friendly voice. And be aware of those four things. If you've got anything that you say, oh, actually that thinking is really based around my fear. I'm wearing a face mask because I'm afraid. Now, I would say sometimes you can wear a face mask just because you love other people and you want to protect them. Does that make sense? So actually, why am I wearing a face mask? Oh, right, okay, and I can love myself. So you can even correct that in your own mind, even continuing to wear something. So if you find yourself getting a bit accusational, or if you're on the receiving end of it, then, and particularly if it's with somebody you're close to, actually just sort it out between you. Forgive, move on quickly. You know, if you're frustrated, work it out. And if you're discouraged, then find a way to encouragement, and just look out for the good news. And it was interesting, just chatting again with somebody in Eastgate yesterday, actually, just saying that actually don't be frightened of the mix of good news with actually some of the sadnesses that surround us. You know, and so the ability to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn is actually a really important reality. So I was saying to somebody the other day, it's okay to be sad. It's all right to be sad if there's been a loss, if you're grieving something. You know, I personally found myself sad sometimes over these few months. Oh, have I lost my joy? Is something wrong with me? No, sadness is sometimes an appropriate response. So, and I think this is one where the devil will come along sometimes and accuses you if you're starting to feel sad or something like that. Now, it's not you remain in it, but actually, if that's true, feel free to say to somebody, so because we can help each other in that moment. Does that make sense? So, you know, those negative, what we call negative emotions, are sometimes appropriate. They're not wrong. And I think that's another area which is a bit confusing, and where I think we're particularly prone to the devil's accusations at that moment in time. So there we go. I think that's what I wanted to say. I hope that's helpful to everybody.